Your favorite scripted talk show, The Daily Market, where we focus on various housing markets throughout the country and their current conditions. As you already know, I'm your host, Casey Sawyer. We're very fortunate to have with us two very special guests. Both are published authors and are considered experts in their field. Help me welcome Nadine Miller and Ryan Artman. Hey, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, welcome to our program. We are very gracious to have you two.
Thank you very much for having us, Casey.
It's an honor to be here.
All right, now I'm sure everybody already knows, but for those who don't, Nadine, you are, at least in our eyes, the foremost expert on the housing markets for Portland and Seattle. Would you agree?
Well, I wouldn't use the term expert, but I definitely feel that I have a pretty good amount of knowledge on those two markets, yes.
And Ryan, you hail from San Francisco, and I'm told that you happen to be the most knowledgeable housing man from there. Am I correct?
That is correct, Casey. I have over 25 years experience, and my last book recently describes the current market down there in the San Francisco area.
Okay, well, believe me, I've read all of your guys' books, but today we're going to be explaining to the viewers the trends and the current state of all three of those markets. So why don't we dive on in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good.
All right. Nadine, why don't you first tell us about the S&P Case-Shiller Index and what it's all about?
My favorite question. The S&P Case-Shiller Index measures the average change in value of residential real estate in a particular geographic market. These indices are designed to be reliable and consistent benchmark of housing prices in the United States. They are calculated monthly and cover 20 major metropolitan areas. Price indices generally select a base year and make that value equal to 100. The number value alone has no meaning, but it is used to indicate relative change. The S&P Case-Shiller Index is normalized to have a value of 100 in January of 2000. If the index is at 125, for example, home prices at that point in time have increased by 25% since January 2000.
How lovely. All right, thank you for explaining that in terms that even an entry college level student would understand. I'm sure our viewers appreciate that. All right, Ryan, tell us about seasonality. Seasonality is a term that's used a lot in the real estate market, but it can be a confusing term. Would you mind clearing that up for us?
Absolutely, Casey, no problem. So the seasonal adjustment procedure, or seasonality, attempts to correct for normal seasonal variation. It provides a basis for comparing different months in more meaningful ways. Data can be affected by the time of year or the seasons, or adjusted to remove these effects. It will be easier to identify real changes in the economy and the housing market. However, abnormal seasonal influences or random events may cause data to be distorted.
Now, what would be considered abnormal, Ryan? Hurricanes, blizzards, or in your market specifically, Godzilla attacks?
Those would definitely qualify as abnormal seasonal influences, although I'd venture to guess that Godzilla attacks would affect more than the housing market all over the world, not just in San Francisco.
And you really got to keep an eye on that Godzilla. He's a pesky character. All right, Nadine, when looked at broadly, what would you say the trends of the markets of Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco have been since 2000? Anything specific going on there?
Well, they do follow a similar pattern, yes. It appears that home prices in the three cities, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco, have all followed a similar trend. Beginning in the early 2000s, home prices were rising until the financial crisis of 2007-2008 hit. The bursting of the United States housing bubble, which peaked in 2006, actually caused real estate pricing to plummet drastically. It was only theory that the housing prices would continue to escalate. With such excessive borrowing and risky investments, it was only a matter of time. It wasn't until 2009 and 2010 that they began to steadily rise. The recovery will remain gradual as unemployment declines and consumer wealth rises.
I know it affected a lot of people when the market crashed, but even through it all, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that the mean index price for all those cities still rose quite a bit since 2000. If I'm not mistaken or overstepping my boundaries here, I believe that Portland housing prices increased by about 42%, the Seattle home prices increased by about 44%, and the San Francisco houses increased by about 58%. That San Francisco number is astounding, Ryan.
It really is. It really shows the true strength of the San Francisco area through the tough times.
Truly is remarkable. Ryan, I do have some more questions for you, but before we get to them, I have another question for Nadine.
Yes, of course.
Nadine, when would you say that the housing market peaked in Seattle? That is, when was the price index highest since 2000? Also, when would you say it reached its bottom, or its 0 point?
Well, for Seattle, it appears home prices peaked in May of 2006 at 218.37. It is not accurate to state that the home prices have reached bottom unless the price index was at exactly 0, which would mean that home prices have dropped by 100% of the value they were in January 2000. Nor did home prices fall to what they were in January 2000. They were all still a certain percentage higher. The indices remained above a level of 100. From my research, I would say that both Portland and San Francisco have followed the same trend.
An index of 218.37 is amazing. That means that houses were 118% more expensive than they were just 6 years prior. Thank you, Nadine. Now, Ryan, a common fear out there for prospective homebuyers is the term underwater. Can you explain to us the term and relate some of those markets to the term and when it's used?
Absolutely. So the term underwater refers to the home purchase loan with a higher balance than the free market value of the home. The situation prevents the homeowner from selling the home unless he or she has cash to pay the loss out of their own pockets. It is likely that the home will fall into foreclosure if the owner cannot afford the mortgage payments anymore. So in order for your home in Portland to be worth as much as you paid for it, you would have to have bought it before April 2006 or after August 2008. The goal there is to have bought the house when the home index level was less than 170.66, the home index level for August 2014.
Now, see, I always assumed that underwater had to do with buying a houseboat, so thank you for the clarification. Now, Ryan, all this index talk and fluctuating prices, what can you tell us about the standard deviation of these different indexes?
Well, Casey, the standard deviation for these three cities are different because it's a measurement of the amount of variation from the mean. Portland and Seattle have a very similar standard deviation because their means are very similar, as well as the amount of variability in the data. San Francisco's standard deviation is significantly different than Portland and Seattle's, however. The data is spread over a larger range of values from the data in Portland and Seattle. Portland has a standard deviation of 25.224, Seattle has a standard deviation of 25.23, and San Francisco has a standard deviation of 32.54.
It really is incredible that all those varying numbers boil down to such a small number when you look at their standard deviation. Fascinating. Nadine, what can you tell me about the range of the index in Portland? And if you could, tell me about the movement of prices, if that's possible.
The range of the index of Portland is 86.51. It is not accurate to use the starting and ending index prices in this time range because it does not show any decreasing or increasing trends over time. By saying the range starts at 100 and ends at 170.66, we would fail to recognize that the index may have in fact been higher than 170.66 at some point. In this case, it was. The highest index level was 186.51. Thus, the range is a more accurate measurement because it does not mislead the reader into thinking that there was one consistent trend. Instead, there were several trends. Prices first increased, peaked, decreased, and then began rising again.
And how do you think that compares to some of the price patterns in Seattle? If their patterns are similar, why do you think that is?
Price patterns over time are very similar in Seattle as compared to Portland. This is mostly because Seattle and Portland have very similar demographics and are therefore affected by national economic changes in a very similar way. They have similar populations, similar incomes, and similar weather. Because of these similarities, national economic changes like the financial crisis of 2007-2008 had a very similar effect on the two cities. In turn, home prices began to rise, especially in metropolitan areas like Seattle and Portland, which are key economic and political regions in the Pacific Northwest.
I'll tell you another similarity. Both of those cities are renowned for their disc golf abilities, unlike those guys in San Francisco. Am I right, Ryan?
I don't know about the rest of the people in San Francisco, Casey, but you know me, I can handle it with the best of them.
Well, perhaps while you're in town, we'll have to see once and for all who has the upper hand in the disc golf game.
You know I'm always up for a challenge, Casey.
Guys, you're on national television right now. Would you mind getting back to the topic at hand?
My apologies. I got excited there for a second. Now let's dive back in and hit Ryan with a particularly tough and hard-hitting question. Ryan, could you please inform the viewers and me on the correlation coefficient of each city? Also, in a business sense, why might these numbers be the way they are?
Absolutely. The correlation coefficient tells us how strongly two variables are related to each other. The correlation coefficient of prices between Portland and Seattle is very high, suggesting Portland and Seattle follow very similar changes regarding home prices. The correlation coefficient between Portland and San Francisco and Seattle are slightly lower though. This is all due to their economics being different and the demographics and the weather. They're just in different regions, so it makes sense that they would be slightly lower than Portland and Seattle. The coefficient between Seattle and Portland is 0.9973, while between Seattle and San Francisco it's 0.7418, and between Portland and San Francisco it's 0.7271. So you see, Casey, the closer we become to 1, the stronger the relationship is, or the closer the variables are.
Well, I think that's some very useful information. It allows consumers to see firsthand how different markets behave compared to their close neighbors and other cities across the country. Thank you, Ryan. Nadine, what would you say if someone asked you to compare Seattle's housing market with New York City? Are they similar? Are they statistically significant?
Well, we must first create a null and alternative hypothesis. The null would be that the mean prices of New York City and Seattle are the same, The alternative hypothesis is that the mean prices of New York City and Seattle are not the same. Upon some very difficult analysis, we would reject the null hypothesis that the mean home prices of New York City and Seattle are the same. The mean index for Seattle is 143.516, and the mean index for New York is 167.721. So if we were to run an ANOVA, we would find that the p-value at a significance level of 95%, or alpha 0.05, is 0.000195505, which is very, very low. Since the p-value is less than 0.05, which is the level of significance, we would reject the null that their means are different, we would reject the null that the means are the same and conclude that they are different, meaning that they are statistically significant because they are in fact different.
Well, there you have it, folks. Seattle is just as statistically significant as New York. I don't care what those Yankees fans tell you.
I don't think that was the message I was conveying.
Moving on to our last question. Brian, what do you think are some of the main variables that can affect the housing prices in cities?
Well, I think it comes down to weather patterns, school districts, job opportunities, and possibly unemployment rate. I've done some recent studies on the unemployment rates and the coefficient correlation due to the price index for the three cities. And I actually found that the unemployment rate really does not affect the index of the housing prices that much, surprisingly. But I believe that school districts and job opportunities and weather patterns would play a bigger effect in those indexes.
All right. Well, before we get going, let's talk about the tabloids a little bit. You know, I've been reading up on them, and lately it shows that you two maybe are romantically linked. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely, Casey. I think it's time to just let it all out there. We've been together for a while now, so it's no secret.
Well, there you have it. All right, that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much for tuning in, and let's give it up for our lovely guests one more time. Thank you. Please join us tomorrow when we have our musical guest Hades on the program to talk about his new album, perform some songs, and also talk to us about his love for real estate. I'm Casey Sawyer saying thank you. Good night.